Have you ever played the most famous horror game, Monopoly? If so, you might have had this happen to you. It's your turn. You're about to roll, only to find the path ahead is paved with hotels. And you only have 51 Monopoly bucks to your name. The pressure is intense. It breaks friendships. So you roll, hoping for sweet relief. Sanctuary amongst the capitalistic towers that loom over every space. But then you land on Boardwalk, with its mighty hotel eclipsing any sort of hope for salvation you had. You turn to the other player, begging, pleading with them to make an exception, or even just haggle down the $2,000 rent you owe so you can live to see another day. But all they do is chuckle, excitement glistening in their eyes at your demise. They turn to you and whisper, "That's not how the game works." But what game are they truly talking about? I'll let you in on a secret. It's greed. Let me give you another example that might help paint the picture. Throughout the remake of Resident Evil 2, there are rooms indicated as safe rooms. These are rooms that are a respite from the zombie-infested corridors. They allow you to relax and calmly get prepped for another venture into the evils that await. In one instance, however, as the game releases the villainous Mr. X to chase you around the police precinct, you find that the main safe room you cherished is no longer safe, as the monstrosity barges in there like an annoying sibling that doesn't respect your boundaries. In the moment that Mr. X invaded my safe space, I couldn't help but yell, "That's not how the game works!" If you haven't already guessed what game that is, then let me enlighten you. It's greed. From the game of Monopoly to a moment in Resident Evil 2, we can understand that greed, often known as the root of all evil, is treated as a game. Because we assume that there will always be both winners and losers. Some have to suffer in order for others to gain. This is the multifaceted nature of greed, which is oftentimes seen as a coin with two sides, where one side is known as avarice, the extreme desire for wealth or material gain, such as the other player in Monopoly wanting all of your money. The other side is known as miserliness, the extreme reluctance to spend or share resources, such as myself when playing Resident Evil 2, not wanting to share my own safe space with others, especially with a murderous stoic. These aspects are inescapable, and encountering the game of greed in our lives is inevitable. It has existed for centuries, omnipresent in our society, and embedded in our psyche. Luckily for us, horror games have a wonderful way of bringing out evocative lessons about the human psyche. In fact, I could do a whole series on what horror games teach us about each of the 7 deadly sins, which I may actually do. Comment if you'd want me to continue this series and subscribe to know when it releases. But when confronting greed, the question arises, is greed bad? This is a question I see get raised often, especially in today's climate. Surely one of the deadly sins, the root of all evils, is a bad thing, right? Yet why are we seeing more and more instances of people exercising their greed? People hoarding wealth, eggs, or even toilet paper, as if toilet paper would somehow be their savior. Now, you can make the argument that greed can save you in Resident Evil 2, but it also can ruin you in Monopoly. So is there a definitive answer? How does the game work? In The Psychology of Greed by Terri Seuntjens, she writes, "From an economic perspective, greed is often advocated as good, as it drives economic progress and development. Classical economic theory is based on the assumption that people should maximize their own outcomes. However, because unbridled greed often takes place at the expense of others, from a moral perspective, greed is often seen as a sin or a vice." It's interesting to see that greed can both be a positive and a negative when you look at it through different perspectives. But this doesn't really answer our question. Seuntjens continues to elaborate that greed influences us in different ways. It can motivate us, make us competitive, and help us to reach our goals. On the other hand, greed can also make us egoistic, neglecting other things that are important for us and others. Greed can thus help us move forward, but it can also help us forget what actually matters. It's confounding, frustrating to go back and forth based on circumstances. How can we come to a definitive answer about the malevolence of this game of greed, especially when the world is conflicted about it? Well, let me enlighten you. The answer is in plain sight, repeated dozens of times in this video. Greed is bad, evil, but it's not being treated as such. It's being treated as a game, where you have both winners and losers. So how could the winners, the people who abuse their greed and profit over it, ever think it was bad? For this video, I will attempt to reinforce how detrimental greed is to our society, as well as the institutions that have been incorrectly permitted to be greedy in the modern age. When we allow these institutions to continue their greed, we lose everything. Because this isn't just a game. It's our lives. So in order to illustrate who is perpetuating greed and what we will lose, I will be using 3 unique horror games to showcase greed's detrimental effects. Throughout each of them, I will ask, who are the winners, the ones permitted to use their greed for personal gain? And what do we lose? Because when they're allowed to be greedy, we all lose. So let's begin. And heads up, but there will be spoilers for each of the 3 games. Part 1. How can we live without our lives? How will we know it's us without our past? John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath. In the psychological horror game Observer, developed by Bluebird Team to be originally released in 2017 and then remastered in 2020, we play as Detective Daniel Lazarski on the hunt for his estranged son, Adam. Set in Krakow, Poland, in the far future of 2084, Daniel Lazarski has the unique role of being an observer, an individual with a license to hack into someone else's mind. Now you may be asking yourself, whoa, what the heck? Oh God, I'm glad we don't do that in real life. What steps could ever have made it legal to hack into someone's mind? Well, in this cyberpunk world where individuals are decorated with cybernetic implants, a digital plague known as the nanophage wiped out much of the population, corrupting individuals' cybernetic augmentations and causing catastrophic failures in people's bodies, such as organ failures or neurological breakdowns, which led to the collapse of governments and society. And from the ashes of this plague-ridden society, a totalitarian megacorporation named Chiron took over and restored their own form of order, creating a corporate-controlled police state. It's crazy how premonitory a game that came out in 2017 is, because it highlighted just how easy it is for a corporation to take advantage of a pandemic to increase their own profits. Because corporations treat greed as a game that they have to win. And when they win, we lose. So why do we allow that to happen? In Observer, society isn't given any choice. They have to comply with the corporation's wishes. Dissenters are constantly being watched in 1984's Big Brother fashion and suppressed before they can cause any issues. As you traverse through an apartment complex in a neighborhood for Class C citizens, the poor and those deemed unproductive for society, you can see the effects the corporate oppression has created. People are hidden in their homes, reluctant to speak to strangers and trust others around them. Many people are suffering from mental and physical health issues, many of which are caused by their cybernetic augments. And yet, this is the status quo. Chiron replaced democracy with their own corporate rule, requiring their corporate policies to be codified as law. Now, this isn't as uncommon or as fictional as you might think. In today's society, corporations have been put on a pedestal, allowing greater liberties than most communities. They're embedded, attached, as if some sort of parasite, and we allow them to exert their greedy culture over our society. In The Corporation, The Pathological Pursuit of Profit and Power, published in 2004 by Joel Bakan, he writes, "Today, corporations govern our lives. They determine what we eat, what we watch, what we wear, where we work, and what we do. We are inescapably surrounded by their culture, iconography, and ideology." Observer takes it a step further, allowing corporate greed to infect our minds. From now dictating our culture to dictating our thoughts, Chiron has access to everything we do or think. Even death does not provide an escape, as our observer Daniel is able to hack into the cybernetic implants of those who tragically passed away, letting him access their memories. For the corporation, no part of life is sacred, and everything is permitted, so long as it makes or protects their profits. Hacking into the minds of those past to see the remnants of their memories and childhoods feels highly unethical. It's also a major privacy concern. Our pasts contribute to who we are. It showcases our innate humanity, even despite the cybernetic augmentations. Observer showcases just how much corporate greed is willing to take from us. Our pasts no longer stay as our own, but instead, it belongs to the company. Who we are is no longer a concern, since society has shifted into looking at us as what we provide. And there is so much more to life than satisfying shareholders. Yet despite the vigor we can feel for life, corporations have stomped out any other meaning than creating value for these shareholders. Bacon continues writing about Milton Friedman, an American Nobel Prize-winning economist who thinks that corporations are good for society and that too much government is bad. There is but one social responsibility for corporate executives, Friedman believes. They must make as much money as possible for their shareholders. This is a moral imperative. Executives who choose social and environmental goals over profits, who try to act morally, are in fact immoral. This is the unique concept that has allowed the greed of corporations to continue all the way to 2084. It's the reason they continue to thrive while others continue to suffer. They don't care about you, or rather, it's immoral to care about you, to show you that they are understanding to who you are as a person, unless it increases their profits. If a corporation is able to prioritize and increase shareholder value, everyone starts feeling like winners. Numbers start going up, the economy is booming, and the corporation presents itself as our savior that will lift us up from peasantry on one condition: that we buy into them and become part of their institution, to be a part of the in-group and feed their greed. But when it comes to feeling like a winner, rarely do people become winners in this vicious circle. For example, as an observer, Daniel Lazarski should be a winner. He has power, wealth, and status in the world created by Chiron. But in order to keep his status, he needs to work. Throughout the game, as you continue incepting people's pasts, Daniel begins to destabilize. Entering people's minds begins to erode his own, as he develops psychological trauma. He experiences severe hallucinations, paranoia, and the deterioration of his mental health. In order to prevent further destabilization, he needs to continuously take medication, unable to live his life and perform his job without the crutch of drugs. In addition, Daniel becomes estranged from his son the person he is desperately searching for in the game. All because he devoted his life to work, to the corporation, and to keep himself in the winner's circle, instead of focusing on his family. This is the cost that Daniel pays, that everyone pays in a corporate-ruled society. And yet they perpetuate this society because they desperately don't want to be losers. They want to be winners at any cost. And the corporation promises them that as long as their greed can go unchecked. So now, to answer the two questions, corporations and their shareholders view themselves as winners because they use their greed, their avarice, for personal gain, to beat everyone else into losers. Everyone else, the losers in this so-called game of greed, lose so much. They live in poverty, always being observed, and every aspect of their life belongs to the corporation. Everyone does not want to become a part of the less fortunate, the people they deem as losers. Their miserliness guiding their desires to stay as a winner. But no matter how hard they try to hold on to their status, they still lose. And the most important part they lose is their pasts, their memories, and the essence of their humanity, which no longer belongs to them. It belongs to the corporation. In the cyberpunk setting, humanity is often hard to find, which is why the past is so important. But if corporations are able to access our pasts for their own personal gain, they could omit several parts, edit what we believe and what happened, and change the course of our present, all in the name of greed. After all, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. George Orwell, 1984. Part 2. Cults and greed are linked because both thrive on the promise of something for nothing. Spiritual salvation or boundless riches, delivered only at the cost of one's soul. Christopher Hitchens. In Resident Evil 4, in both the 2005 original game and the 2023 remake developed by Capcom, you play as Leon Kennedy, a special agent embarked to a rural town in Spain to rescue Ashley Graham, the daughter of the President of the United States, who has been kidnapped by a religious cult named Los Iluminados. Now, when it comes to greed, you might think the primary message that Resident Evil 4 gives us is solely about wealth and riches. After all, you play as a white man, looting treasures and wealth from a developing society. Gee, I hope that doesn't happen in real life. Also, we start to see the disparities of wealth from the surrounding town to the castle, which, just to be clear, the display of wealth the castle shows is incredibly stark. From the intricate rooms, the knight armor, having your own torture room, to even having a mini roller coaster that transports you through the enormity of the castle, it's insane. And yet the generational wealth of the Salazar family is still not the main message about greed. Resident Evil 4 highlights greed through control rather than wealth. The way that the game showcases this is by illuminating the effect of Las Plagas, the mind-controlling parasite that Los Iluminados used to gain power and influence. They used these parasites for their own greedy purposes, ruining and controlling the lives of hundreds of innocent civilians, many of which can be seen being blown to bits by our main hero. But they didn't stop there. Los Iluminados believed in their own greedy desires, enough to infect both Leon and Ashley to exert their power and influence upon the United States and eventually the world. They worked tirelessly to manufacture advanced versions of Las Plagas in order to better suit their mission. They only had one greedy goal in mind: to rule the world, in comical villain fashion. But there's one aspect about the entire scenario and one person in this equation that I don't believe gets enough of the spotlight. Ramon Salazar, the 8th Count of Vandalobos and sole heir to the Salazar fortune. Ramon serves as one of the primary antagonists and faithful servant to Los Iluminados. In fact, I'm going to make the argument that Ramon Salazar was the most important character in the entire game. In order to explain, I need to briefly discuss his lineage. Ramon is the 8th generation of the Salazars, the first being Count Gregorio, the Conqueror, who reached the lands and eradicated the evil that befell the castle. It turns out, Los Iluminados is not a new cult in any way. It had existed previously, using Las Plagas to control its followers, even linking all the way back to one Adam Sandler. But Count Gregorio, fueled by the ferocity of the Roman Catholic Crusades, entered the lands and conquered the pagan cult, condemning Las Plagas to the caves beneath the castle, the same castle he built up after his conquest. In the years and generations after, Count Gregorio became somewhat of a legend, the hero that saved the day and locked up the demons in hell. Each generation afterwards was tasked with the role to ensure that Las Plagas remained trapped. But the love for the Salazars was diluted over time, probably from the incredible disparity of wealth from the castle and the Salazar family to the folk in the nearby town. Finally, as we get to Ramon Salazar, all the love for the Salazar family had died, with his strict father, Diego the Severe, dying of unnatural circumstances to which they would write, "murdered at the hands of the devil," and his mother, Catalina, inviting the devil to help cure Ramon of his terminal illness, then disappearing afterwards. Ramon was left orphan at a young age, the sole inheritor of the Salazar fortune, and mission to keep Las Plagas from resurfacing. Now, the reason I'm describing his lineage is not to paint him as some sort of hero. After all, one servant recalls Ramon pouring acid over another servant for mocking him. But what I'm trying to convey, the reason why Ramon is one of the most important characters in the story, is that he was manipulated by Los Iluminados. In the game, with his shortened stature and surprisingly elderly looks, he was just 20 years old. He was just a kid. Naive, impressionable, and alone. Both of his parents encountered and were disposed of by this so-called devil, which is presumed to be Osmond Sadler, the current leader of Los Iluminados and descendant of the cult's initial leaders. Sadler had entered the region of Spain in the goal of freeing Las Plagas from beneath the castle and using them in his own greedy endeavors to rule the world. His avarice knew no bounds, especially when confronted with the opportunity to both groom and manipulate a child into joining his cult, a cult that he had already manipulated dozens of members to be on his side, probably with his charming good looks. Sadler fed the lies into Ramon's head, that his ancestors did a horrible deed by locking up Las Plagas, and that he should atone for the sins of his forefathers by releasing them. He promised to make the Salazars great again. Ramon was a child, unable to comprehend the severity of his actions, or his ancestors' actions. Throughout his life, he had been told how much he shouldn't have existed, how everything was the fault of his family, and of him. In the boss fight against him, you can hear him regurgitate the same hatred he had heard his entire life. Lines such as, Ramon thought he was not worthy, that he was a problem. Sadler took what little self-worth Ramon had and crushed it for the sake of getting control of his life. This is a common tactic with many greedy cult leaders. In cults, Inside the World's Most Notorious Groups and Understanding the People Who Joined Them, published in 2022 by Max Cutler, Cutler writes about the famous cult leader Charles Manson and the impact he had on his followers, especially his female followers. Charles convinced her that he was the only person who who could make her feel listened to, valued, special, and beautiful. Cult leaders prey on desperation. They want you to feel isolated, stealing whatever self-belief you had and placing it upon themselves, so you could feel that that was the only source belief could come from. Just like Sadler, wanting to have Ramon feel like he's out of other options, to feel remorse for something he had no control over, and to think that he was the answer, the only solution to Ramon's troubles. All because Sadler placed himself on a pedestal as a direct prophet of God. This is common for those like Ramon, who have incredible amounts of wealth. We often want answers and guidance from those we feel are in higher positions than we are, just like many cult leaders being wealthy. And when their wealth isn't enough, they have to assume a position higher. The psychologist Robert Lifton pointed out this particular maneuver in cult leaders, who often position themselves as powerful spiritual figures to their followers, elevated above the rest of mankind. This is the playbook that Osmond Sadler followed in order to get to power. He saw an opportunity in the form of young Ramon Salazar and took it to help fuel his own greed. He wanted to be a winner, to have power at the expense of others. And Ramon wanted to be a part of the winners, to keep his family's wealth and adoration. He voluntarily accepted Las Plagas, surrendering all free will and present life to Sadler, only because he believed it was in his best interest and for the interest of God. In his final moments, Ramon calls out for help from the one person he believed could save him. In this moment, I don't see the monster that Ramon became. I see a child turned into a monster by a leader who tossed him aside in an instant. Cult leaders have no issue making their followers pawns in their game. After all, no cult can rise into power without people, often in sacrificial positions. This idea always brings me back to all the victims of Resident Evil 4, those unwillingly subscribed to the greed of this cult. The people referred to as ganados, or Spanish for livestock, cattle. Dehumanized in every way possible and not allowed to live a life for themselves, only for the greedy institution that profited off their labor, forcing them to work with a smile on their face. Throughout the game, after reaching various points of the village, reading journals of their horrifying experiences, and seeing the black and white photographs taken by a brand new technology unbeknownst to the villagers before, we get to see what this village was. Similarly to Ramon, it was young, in its infancy, and developing into something it never got the chance to reach. The villagers' present was robbed from them as they lived a life that those in power wanted them to live. Their free will was removed entirely for the sake of greed. One of the most poignant moments of the game, after we finish saving the day and stopping this evil cult, is the end credits scene, which paints a somber image of what life was like before the cult had re-emerged. As Jacob Geller puts it,
they were normal and happy, and then a powerful evil cult showed up with literal parasites infecting the community against their will and turning each villager into an unwilling weapon.
I can only imagine the pain they must feel, to watch a life unfold before their eyes that they had no choice in creating, all because they were manipulated by a man who believed that their free will was his to control, that God gave him the right to be greedy, and for everyone else to lose. So now, to answer the two questions, cults and their leaders view themselves as winners because they use their greed, their avarice, for personal gain and power to control everyone else into losers. Everyone else, the losers in this so-called game of greed, lose so much. They are unable to live a meaningful life for themselves. They slave away at the bidding of cult leaders, and every aspect of their life belongs to the cult. And the most important part they lose is their present. Though they can feel like they're a part of the group, a part of the winners, they are not and never will be. They lose their free will and the power of choice to do what's best for them, all in exchange of bettering the lives of the so-called winners. As seen in case after case, it was the cult leaders who lit the fire, and the people trapped within their grip who tragically acted as the fuel. Part 3. We are in danger of destroying ourselves by our greed and stupidity. We cannot remain looking inwards at ourselves on a small and increasingly polluted and overcrowded planet. Stephen Hawking. In the 2024 survival horror game Crow Country, developed by SFB Games, yes, the same SFB Games that horrifically destroyed our friendships with snipper clips, you play as Special Agent Mara Forrest, investigating the disappearance of Edward Crow and the abrupt closure of his theme park, Crow Country. Set in the year 1990, Crow Country is a blast from the past, highlighting wacky environments littered with horrifying abominations. I'm talking creepy crawlies, ooze monsters. I don't even know what the hell that is. All of these monsters serve to get in the way of discovering the horrible truth the game presents. The truth that your name isn't Mara Forrest, and you aren't even a special agent. Your name is Elaine Marshall. Confused? That's okay. The reasons for being greedy often becomes more and more confusing as time goes on. So let me start from the beginning. In 1980, Edward Crow was on a walk with his father in a national park where they discovered a green, strange, tentacle-like plant. They chose to cut it open, as one does when they find a random tentacle on the ground, and discovered that the inside was made of pure gold. Pure, unadulterated gold. The pair of them begin to start excavating the area, greedily discovering more roots that lead all the way down to a sort of pool-like structure. In order to conceal these roots and their exponential growth of wealth, they devise many plans. One being that they buy an abandoned mine in Brazil so that the origin of the gold can be traced there, though geological data shows that it's not. The other plan they implement was building an amusement park on top of the roots and naming it Crow Country. What a great solution! After all, no one questions anything when they're having fun in an amusement park. Would you question something when you're in the jolliest place on earth? Of course not. However, in 1988, a strange human-like figure comes out of the pool, covered in wounds and growths and crying in pain around the park. Edward Crow thought it might be someone who had an accident, so out of fears of lawsuits or risk that the roots might be exposed, locks them away in a detention cell. This is where Elaine Marshall, the character we play as, comes in. Celebrating her 15th birthday at her favorite amusement park, she solves a puzzle that was concealing the entry to the security zone where the humanoid figure was being held. Bumping into this horribly disfigured creature, Elaine becomes infected by a terminal virus and gets sent to the hospital to be treated. Eventually, as more and more monsters, even more deformed than before, start entering the park from the pool, Edward Crow has no choice but to shut Crow Country down. This brings us to 1990, the year in which Elaine, after 2 years of suffering through ineffective medical treatments, decides to flee the hospital and get answers. Elaine, under the guise of Special Agent Mara Forrest, goes through the park to confront Edward Crow and learns the horrible truth about these so-called monsters, the guests of the park that infected her 2 years prior. These humanoid monsters are, in fact, just humans who time traveled through the pool, or rather, the portal that humans were using to escape the doomed future of the year 2106. It turns out that Crow Country is an allegory to the dangers of climate change. This cute survival horror game carries a hefty message, a message about the dangers greed has upon our future. When Edward Crow and his father began harvesting gold from the roots, they unknowingly began harming the portal and its function. This is why the guests who traversed the portal became monstrous versions of themselves, continuously in pain. They were fleeing a future that had become ruined and ultimately doomed. In an effort to survive and potentially warn the past about the dangers, they rushed through the portal, only to meet another doomed existence. Though who built the portal or who owned it is a mystery, the Crow family made sure that no one would be able to properly use it anymore. All in the name of greed. So that Edward Crow, a wealthy pillar and leader of the lovable theme park community, and those a part of the Crow family, can continue to win, while all of us lose. In the book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate, published in 2014 by Naomi Klein, she writes, "Climate change has never received the crisis treatment from our leaders, despite the fact that it carries the risk of destroying lives on a vastly greater scale than collapsed banks or collapsed buildings." I have to be honest with you all. In regards to Crow Country, not everyone will think of this greed as a bad thing, because it is being perpetuated by a group that is often permitted to be greedy, far more than corporations, cults, or anything else. This extreme greed is being perpetuated by a family. I see this a lot in today's society, where we allow the avarice and miserliness of families to be permitted, as if greed is somehow looking out and taking care of your loved ones. But the greed of a family is never contained within a small group. A family can't be full of winners without making others losers. It doesn't matter if generational wealth is formed from investments, owning an emerald mine, or harvesting roots filled with gold. If the greedy policies to maintain and grow wealth indefinitely for a particular family become mainstream, then it would affect every other family negatively, especially at the expense of our future. We are stuck because the actions that would give us the best chance of averting catastrophe and would benefit the vast majority are extremely threatening to an elite minority that has a stranglehold over our economy, our political process, and most of our major media outlets. For Edward Crow, harvesting the gold from the roots was fueled by avarice. He wanted his family to prosper. Some may make the argument that sometimes greedy people are unaware of the consequences of their greed, but that can never be a valid excuse. The consequences of greed are always present, and even when we know the consequences, families still choose to be greedy. In 1988, when the first human walked through the portal and was discovered by Edward Crow, he handed him a note, attempting to speak to him. It reads, 2106, Uninhabitable Ruin. We come, 1988. Last chance. Warn, stop, change. Edward Crow had already been harvesting the gold for many years at this point, more than enough to retire for dozens of lifetimes. Yet when confronted with the origins of this mysterious person, to know that a calamity is ahead of us, all he did was continue. Perpetuating the cycle of greed his father started, and denying the calamity's existence. He, along with the rest of us, are in a pot of water that's incrementally coming to a boil. As the temperature rises slowly, you cannot feel the difference. Therefore, you don't care enough about the change until it's too late. This is the consequence of greed. It never shows its face all at once. Why should it? Families in several institutions are permitted to be as greedy as they want, and by the time the consequences come to light, it's far too late to reverse course. Even Edward Crow, horrified at what he had done while being blinded by greed, attempts to atone for his sins by jumping into the portal to see what's on the other side. But no atonement can reverse the consequences of his actions. Throughout the game, there are two distinctly haunting moments that I can't seem to get out of my mind. The first being the chance to see the Cosmic Future section of the amusement park, slated to release the year that Elaine confronts Edward Crow. The issue is that now, after all that has been done, that part of the park will never be built, and the future will never arrive. How awful to know, especially when you're young, or you've been cured of the terminal disease that plagued your life, that the future is still uncertain. That because of greed, it had been robbed right from under you. The final haunting memory that will stay with me for a horrifyingly long time is what Elaine says every time when coming to a fire, to a save point in the game. Staring into the flames, I feel something. It's a curious mixture of hope and dread. Maybe everything will be okay. Maybe it won't. Crow Country is by far the scariest game I'll discuss today, and most likely one of the scariest games of all time. All for the idea that the troubles affecting the world are the same ones we are facing today. Just like Elaine, I feel a sense of hope, especially reading what society is doing to fix this, and to read the words of Naomi Klein saying, "The resources required to rapidly move away from fossil fuels and prepare for the coming heavy weather could pull huge swaths of humanity out of poverty, providing services now sorely lacking, from clean water to electricity." But at the same time, I feel the equally strong sense of dread, especially when seeing the roadblocks, and to read the words of the same author, Naomi Klein, saying, "By failing to fight these big battles that stand to shift our ideological direction and change the balance of who holds power in our societies, a context has been slowly created in which any muscular response to climate change seems politically impossible, especially during times of economic crisis, which lately seems to be all the time. All I can do at this time is to help spread an understanding of why this is happening, and to answer the two questions. Families and their members view themselves as winners because they use their greed, their avarice, for a sense of security and safety, at the risk of putting everyone in danger. Everyone else, the losers in this so-called game of greed, lose so much. They are unable to envision what life will be like while the world seems to burn around them. The most important part we lose is our future. Though people can feel like a part of the family, enjoying a day at their favorite theme park, and feel like winners, they won't be. They, and everyone, will lose their future, a chance to grow up and to live happy lives. This is the price of living in a society that empowers the greedy. Living with this kind of cognitive dissonance is simply part of being alive in this jarring moment in history, when a crisis we have been studiously ignoring is hitting us in the face, and yet we are doubling down on the stuff that is causing the crisis in the first place. I'll be honest, it's a strange feeling to wrap up this video. Greed is an evil stain upon humanity that continues to bleed. Each game discussed is fictitious, though each showcase a very real consequence of unbridled greed. Whether it's taking our pasts, controlling our presents, or destroying our future. Each instance of temporal greed feels overwhelmingly malicious. How could we allow these aspects to happen? To allow the institutions of corporations, cults, and even families be as greedy as they desire? And why do we feel so powerless to stop it? If I can offer one answer, one way to look at it, then I need to talk about the idea of how the game works. Each instance of greed feels systematic, where corporations enact laws to ensure their culture is gospel, where cults manipulate others to ensure their power is perpetuated, and where families hoard resources, all in the name of saving themselves. This is how the game works. The game that society has created to create a false dichotomy between winners and losers. After all, once they label you as a loser, they don't want you to feel that you have any semblance of power. That's reserved solely for the winners. So you have to buy into their greed to allow them to be as greedy as they want for you to be labeled as a winner. But thanks to the lessons given by these horror games, I truly feel like we have the agency to make change. Because every single game showcases that we can pull through. Not by inaction, but taking time to pick up the controller and do the hard work. These institutions feel powerful, untouchable, but we often forget that these institutions are comprised of individuals. Individuals like me and individuals like you. To quote one of my favorite lines in Game of Thrones,
"Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick, a shadow on the wall."
and we all need to believe that the greedy aren't all powerful, that we have the opportunity to change the writing of our pasts, the control of our present, and the outcome of our future before it is too late. And the little screaming fact that sounds through all history: repression only works to strengthen and knit the repressed. John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath. I hope this video has helped you, either to understand greed or to fear its consequences, because you are not alone. These individuals that exercise their greed are no different than the ones before. And though history may not repeat, it often rhymes. Now, greedy individuals have become so bigoted that they were willing to destroy our pasts, present, and future just so they could say they own the ashes. So we have to band together to pull through it and prevent the burning of our entire existence to the flames of greed. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I know this video may have been just a drop in the bucket of your life, or maybe it repeated so many things you've already come to know. But what I truly hope this video does is to help spur you into action, to help save our lives, because inaction opens the door for greedy individuals to take control. I hope, at the end of it all, we can prevent greed. Can we pull it off? All I know is that nothing is inevitable. Nothing except that greed changes everything. And for a very brief time, the nature of that change is still up to us. Thank you.